In this recording, we're going to take a look at the problem of the which clause for your writing. Before we even look at some examples in writing, we have to understand what which is. So which and that are essentially the same word. They're both relative pronouns. So what does that mean? On the pronoun side, it just means they're not proper nouns. They're pronouns that stand in for something else. And relative just means that they have meaning in relationship to something else in the sentence. So that is going to, and which are both going to point back to something else in the sentence that tells us what they mean. So for instance, if I were to say, which I remember, we can hear that that's not a full sentence, just a fragment. And one of the reasons is the which doesn't have anything to point back to. I don't know what the which refers to. So in order to use which and that, you have to have an independent clause somewhere else connected to it so that you have this relationship. And which and that are used only for things and not for people. If you want to talk about people or animals, you have to use who, and we'll talk about that later. So if these two words are essentially the same thing, how do you ever know which one of them to choose? Well, let's take a look at this sentence here. The Norman invasion of England, which took several years to complete, began with the day-long Battle of Hastings. So my main sentence is this part. The Norman invasion of England, here's my subject, and then my verb, began with the day-long battle. This bit about how long it took is interesting, and it has something to do with the main idea, but it's not crucial. In fact, I could take this part completely out, which took several years to complete, and my sentence is no different. The Norman invasion of England began with the day-long battle. Whether I put this information in or whether I take it out, the main sentence is not changed at all. So if that's the case, if the information in your clause is just interesting but not crucial, you introduce it with which, and you put a comma in front and a comma after. So why are we going to use a comma there? Well, one of the things that commas do is to tell the reader to take a pause. That's not a rule for knowing whether you put the comma there or not, but the pause is real. That's what I want my reader to do. Take a break for a second because the information coming up is somehow different from the rest. In the which clause, the difference is that the which information isn't that important. So I want to tell my reader, don't get too worked up over this clause here. It's not that important. And the way I do that is to set it up with a comma in the front, a comma in the back, and I pick which. And if I have a clause like that, what I'm going to call it is a non-essential clause. But if the information in the clause is essential, I really need it to give you the main sense of my sentence, then I can't use a comma because I don't want my reader to take a break, and I can't use which because which introduces non-essential information. So which one am I going to use? I need a relative pronoun, that to the rescue. So the invasion, and here's my verb, the invasion began, but I don't know which invasion that is. Which invasion am I talking about? The one I'm talking about is the one that brought the end to the Anglo-Saxon culture in Britain. If I take this clause out, I still have a sentence. I have the invasion began on October 14th, 1066, around 9 a.m. But it's not the same sentence as if I leave it in. Now I'm telling my reader, this is the invasion I'm talking about. If I take this clause out, I have a completely different sentence. Or rather, I guess it's not completely different, but it's not clear which invasion I'm talking about. If I put it back in, then I know which one I want. And that is called the essential clause. If the information is not crucial, it's called a non-essential clause, and you set it off with commas, and you put a which in front of it. So what does this mean for your writing? That means that no analysis whatsoever can go in a which clause. A which clause is non-essential. So if you put your analysis in the which clause, you don't really have any argument. You're saying, hey, my analysis stuff isn't really important, but it is. It can't go in a which clause. So here's an example of how which is being used incorrectly. After Grendel's attacks on Herod, Hrothgar is left stunned and bewildered. So that's good quotation. We just picked the two words that we want. And then we put a comma in front of the which is proper punctuation, except now my commentary, which suggests his emotional fragility, is stuck in a which clause, and it's stuck on the end of the sentence. So it's not functioning as it needs to. The commentary needs to be central to the sentence, not just extra information that gets stuck in a which clause. The other thing that's wrong with this is if which is a relative pronoun, I better be able to find a noun that I could draw an arrow to prior to the which. So I could say, yeah, this noun back here somewhere is the thing that which is referring to. But that's not really working here. This whole sentence about him being left stunned and bewildered is really the referent, the thing that which is pointing back to. You can't really do that. Which is a single pronoun. It has to have a single noun to which it points back. So how are we going to fix that? The good and bad thing is there isn't one way to fix it. One possible way that you can do it is to use a thing called an appositive. An appositive is a phrase that renames another noun. And you can use it with a comma. We're going to learn that rule coming up a little bit later. And it works very nicely. It gets you out of the problem of the which clause, but it doesn't take a lot of fiddling with the sentence. So, after Grendel's attack, blah, blah, Hrothgar is left stunned and bewildered, comma, and here's my appositive. Two terms that suggest his emotional fragility. So I'm keeping my term, emotional fragility, but I've gotten rid of the which clause, which was incorrect in the first place, both grammatically and compositionally, and now I have an appositive. This bit here, two terms, that is the noun clause, or the little noun phrase, that renames these two things that came in front of it, bewildered and stunned. They are two terms that do this thing I want them to do. So that's one way that you can fix the problem with the which clause, and that works sometimes, but it's not going to work always. And the struggle with this, of course, is to know what is going to be a good way to do it. That's hard. That takes practice. You just have to keep trying new things. But the one thing that you can do now is just eliminate the which clauses following your CDs, because that's never going to work. So here are three sentences that all use the which clause incorrectly. They're putting the commentary into the which clause. Stop the recording here for a second, read these sentences, and just scribble out a possible revision to it that gets rid of the which clause. And then start the recording again, and we'll look at some specific ways that you could have revised it. So here's our first revision. Problem with this use of which is that the which is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. Which is not pointing back to a single noun, and it's also introducing the commentary, which it can't do. Which introduces a non-essential clause, but here's essential information, so I can't make the sentence work. When Beowulf arrives at the dragon's cave, he simply shouts, which shows that, using the which incorrectly, and we're also using shows, so we don't want anything like that. But we do want to get to this idea of human adversary, not a human adversary. That's a really good idea. We just have to get at it from some other way than using which shows. So I can keep the sentence the same at the beginning if I want, but if I change my subject from a person to another noun like decision, I can still keep my quotation, and then I can use a much better verb. His decision simply to shout at the dragon indicates that something. He does not consider the dragon a human adversary. Same idea, same key term. I just took out the which, and I was able to replace it with a real verb and that. My next sentences then would explain how that works. What is it about this word that suggests that Beowulf doesn't consider him a human adversary? So my following sentences would be, well, Beowulf doesn't start talking, he doesn't start using words. In fact, the text doesn't even say what he shouted. It just gives us that word, shouting, as opposed to talking to him. And that would be my support for this claim about the human adversary. What we're doing here, though, is we're just getting out of the habit of putting which something and then giving your commentary here. It shortcuts your explanation. Here, you probably just stop and say, well, I've done what I was supposed to do. No, you haven't really. You just put shows with a which clause and then threw a sentence in there, and I'm supposed to figure out how it works. If you do it this way, you set yourself up for these next sentences that end up doing the explanation of your CD. The narrator admits that it was only Beowulf's chainmail that saved him in the battle with Grendel's mom, which reveals that Beowulf is not a perfect hero. This is, again, that kind of short-circuiting that we saw with because. You can't just leap ahead from this admission of the narrators to this claim by sticking it in a which clause. First of all, which introduces what kind of information? Non-essential. But this is essential. This is your whole interpretation of the narrator's admission about the chainmail. We can't stick it into a which clause. So another way to do that is to sort of flip that bit, take this perfect hero thing, which is my main idea, and put it at the beginning. Narrator first hints at Beowulf's status as an imperfect hero. When is that? In the battle with Grendel's mom. And what is it about that battle that suggests this imperfect status? When Beowulf is saved only by his chainmail. And the next sentence is going to be, your reader's going to say to you, how does it do that? What is it about chainmail as the thing that saves him that suggests he's an imperfect hero? So this other strategy that you can use is to flip your sentence. If you originally wrote it with a which clause, take the stuff that's in the which clause and put it at the beginning. Take the stuff that started the sentence and put it at the end. All right, here's our last one here. Grendel's status as a descendant of Cain complicates, really nice verb there. His role as a villain, okay, great idea, which makes him more interesting opponent than the mother or the dragon. This is something like what we looked at earlier, where we're trying to cram too much in a single sentence. This is a good claim. He's a descendant of Cain. That's something that happens. That's just true of the text. And here's my reading of it. It complicates his role as a villain. One way I could fix this that I haven't done here is just stop the sentence right here. Put a period, and then all of this stuff about the more interesting part, could essentially just take it out if I wanted, and just argue this idea about interesting in the sentences that follow. I have a nice claim here. This whole bit about being the descendant of Cain is complicating this role as a villain. My reader wants to know what I mean by that. I really don't have to cram more stuff into this sentence. I already have a nice expression here. But if we wanted to keep it, we can just put this interesting part at the beginning. He's a far more interesting opponent than his mother or the dragon, and the reader says, okay, why is that? Because of his status as a descendant of Cain. What we didn't do here, remember what we do with because, is we can't put just a simple fact of the text. Although this is true of the text, it's something that has to be explained. The reader's going to say, what does this have to do with him being far more interesting? Instead of just saying something like, he's more interesting because he fights Beowulf. That's just a simple fact of the text. This is a more complicated fact of the text. But you could, as I said earlier, just take it out. Just stop your sentence here. Start to become aware of when you've said something important enough that it needs more development, and you don't have to cram more stuff in there. All right, so keep the which clauses in mind. Really save the which clause, not for your analysis. No more which clauses for your analysis. Save it for when you have extra info that doesn't change the meaning of the main clause.